As the Labor Day weekend emerges on the horizon, it symbolizes the unofficial farewell to summer for countless Americans. Perhaps you are contemplating a sojourn to a cherished lakeside enclave or extending invitations to your neighbors for a Labor Day soiree. Yet, why do we commemorate Labor Day? According to the Department of Labor's official dossier, Labor Day represents an homage to the labor movement's inception and stands as a testament to the social and economic triumphs achieved by American toilers. Nevertheless, it's imperative to note that this specific portrayal scarcely scratches the surface of the multifaceted essence that characterizes this quintessentially American observance. Labor Day's story is anything but concluded, and its historical narrative is both intricate and rooted in stark reality. In truth, Labor Day's inception unfolded as a strategic political maneuver orchestrated by President Grover Cleveland in 1894, aimed at quelling the ire of labor unions. The justification for Labor Day has undergone reinterpretations, often overlooking the historical relics of the labor movement. According to Morgan Reynolds, labor unions were once shrouded in secrecy, with members bound by clandestine oaths. Unionists resorted to tactics of intimidation, threats, vandalism, and even violence, particularly targeting non-compliant workers who were disparagingly branded as scabs and blacklegs. The principles of private property, freedom of contract, competition, and the liberty to move across various occupations were once lauded ideals. However, it appears that the Department of Labor has chosen to consign these notions to oblivion. Regrettably, Labor Day did not originate as a sincere gesture of appeasement. President Cleveland's intentions to recognize the social and economic accomplishments of the labor movement were far from genuine. Asserting that these achievements were readily evident is somewhat off the mark, as many of them were largely illusory in the year 1894. The decades following the American Civil War ushered in a period of profound transformation in the United States. In the latter half of the 19th century, the working conditions prevailing in railroads, mines, mills, and factories represented some of the bleakest chapters in American labor history. Issues such as inadequate ventilation, interminable work hours, meager wages, hazardous environments, and the scourge of child labor loomed large among the grievances of the working class. It was against this backdrop that a burgeoning labor movement emerged, sparked by the deplorable working conditions of the era. This epoch marked the zenith of the Industrial Revolution, where it was not uncommon for laborers to routinely toil for more than 80 hours a week. The concept of a 5-day, 40-hour work week, which most Americans now take for granted, didn't become commonplace until the 1940s. As American workers yearned for improved working conditions, higher wages, and shorter work hours, labor unions gained momentum. Strikes and protests, exemplified by the tragic 1886 Haymarket riots in Chicago that claimed the lives of 7 police officers and 4 civilians, underscored the urgent need for change. In the late 1800s, American laborers began vociferously advocating for 8-hour workdays. During this period, it's important to note that employees were not yet accorded the labor protections and rights that we now consider fundamental. Workers of that era did not enjoy the automatic benefits of safe working conditions, fair hiring and firing procedures, or avenues for addressing grievances. They lacked the privilege of sick leave or annual leave to contend with the pervasive unfair labor practices. In response to these injustices, laborers united and forged unions. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that even these unions were tainted by corruption and racial biases that permeated American labor organizations. This dark stain resulted from the exclusionary practices that barred African Americans, Chinese, Mexicans, Catholics, and immigrants from various parts of Europe. The term Native Protestants served as a label adopted by white Northern men to distinguish themselves from their fellow white citizens. Regarding immigrants, this label was employed to indicate that individuals were native-born and bred within the United States. In the case of African Americans, following the Civil War, a significant number relocated northward in pursuit of employment opportunities in low-skilled jobs, factories, and the burgeoning manufacturing sector. The railroad industry, in particular, presented a multitude of job openings for African Americans during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. However, native Protestants viewed the influx of African American laborers with trepidation, perceiving them as potential competition that could result in the loss of jobs. There was a prevailing fear that African American workers might be compelled to toil for extended hours at reduced wages. Consequently, many white individuals. In response to their concerns, many white individuals banded together and established associations that, by their very constitution, barred not only African Americans but also Catholics and other minority groups. Meanwhile, the situation shifted, and there arose a circumstance where a union representative named Smith was conspicuously absent, arriving 20 minutes late for his appointment. The whereabouts of Mr. Smith remained a mystery, as he had not been cited since he made a commitment to reform the union. Amidst these turbulent times, African American laborers found themselves compelled to forge their own unions, exemplified by the formation of groups like the Pullman Porters. Various incidents and tensions had been brewing throughout the 1880s, marked by recurrent workers' strikes. In May 1886, these mounting issues between laborers. The tensions between labor and management reached a breaking point as the labor movement had designated May 1st as the deadline for industries to meet their demands. Their rallying cry centered on achieving an 8-hour workday without any reduction in pay. On May 3rd of that fateful year in Chicago, what began as a peaceful strike took a tragic turn when the police opened fire on the assembled crowd, resulting in the deaths of 2 strikers. The following night, in Chicago's Haymarket Square, the situation spiraled into a full-blown riot, leading to the loss of several police officers' lives and numerous other casualties. In the aftermath of the Haymarket incident, a significant number of Union protesters were apprehended and arrested. The violence during these events claimed the lives of several police officers, resulting in the arrest and sentencing of 7 men to death. Of these, 4 were executed by hanging, while 1 took their own life before facing the gallows. 6 years later, the governor of Illinois granted clemency to the remaining 3 men, acknowledging them as victims of mass hysteria, an impartial jury, and a prejudiced judge. The reverberations of the Haymarket massacre and its consequential trial had both national and international repercussions. It ultimately paved the way for May 1st to be recognized as International Labor Day in 1890, a commemoration observed worldwide. This historic moment symbolized the unity of workers across the globe in their pursuit of fair treatment and justice. Following the Haymarket massacre, the aftermath took a grim toll on the workforce. Chicago industrialist George Pullman responded by downsizing his workforce, terminating the employment of hundreds of workers, and reducing the wages of those who remained. Adding to the strike, he adamantly refused to lower rent or store rates in the company town of Pullman, Illinois, where his workers both lived and worked. Now, let's shift our attention to the contractual aspects, including sales benefits and perks, as well as the delightful green cookies distributed on St. Patrick's Day. It's evident that the landscape has transformed significantly from how it once was. Smith, who was involved in these matters, is no longer. The echoes of discontent resound loudly. It wasn't always like this at all. Music, urgency mounts, as we scrutinize these matters. Come on, let's scrutinize those records. Atoms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of them, as they apprehend and escort individuals away. Such treatment of the working man is unconscionable. In due course, a day would come when we, the labor force, would unite and demand the fair and equitable treatment we rightly deserve. If only we had heeded the counsel of that young boy instead of subjecting him to the harsh fate of being engulfed in the abandoned coke oven. In the throes of anger and financial hardship, the workforce staged a resolute strike in May 1894. The Union of American Railroads joined forces in boycotting all trains that utilized Pullman's rail cars, serving as a show of solidarity and support for the cause. The magnitude of the Pullman strike was profoundly impactful, as it effectively paralyzed rail traffic and commerce across a staggering 27 states, spanning from Chicago to the West Coast. Companies found themselves compelled to implore the federal government to intervene and put an end to the strike, fearing significant financial losses. In response to this plea, President Grover Cleveland took decisive action by dispatching federal troops to the city. Their mission was to enforce an order mandating the return of railroad workers to their duties. However, the arrival of these troops only served to exacerbate the situation further. The Pullman Strike spiraled out of control, descending into chaos as riots erupted. The rioters wreaked havoc by destroying hundreds of railroad cars, creating a tumultuous scene that extended southward. In the tumultuous backdrop of Chicago, the National Guard reacted to these mounting threats by resorting to force, resulting in the tragic loss of 30 lives. Even before the eruption of the railroad strike, both the President and Congress recognized that labor issues in the United States were spiraling into a state of chaos. They extended their sympathies to the workers and acknowledged that the problem transcended national borders. It was a global predicament. Seeking a resolution and looking to distance themselves from the unfortunate events of the Haymarket Massacre a few years earlier, in June 1894, Congress took action while the Pullman Company and railroad workers were still embroiled in the strike. They passed legislation. Henceforth, in an effort to commemorate and pay tribute to the invaluable contributions of American workers, Congress took decisive action in June 1894. They designated the first Monday of September as a federal holiday, known as Labor Day. Yet, you might wonder why some people still find themselves laboring on Labor Day. Being a federal holiday, Labor Day leads to the closure of all government offices, including the post office. Banks, which typically adhere to the Federal Reserve holiday schedule, also shutter their doors. Additionally, many private businesses choose to follow this pattern of closure. However, it's crucial to note that the closure of private businesses is not obligatory, and a considerable number of large retailers and chain stores opt to remain open. Most restaurants, too, keep their doors ajar, although a select few may. Americans still have to work on Labor Day. If you liked our video, don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more videos like this one.